And welcome back, everybody. I'm still Brian.
And I'm still Aaron.
And we're still talking, but now we're talking about Module 11. Module 11 is the DR side. So it's not uncommon that when we're doing these discussions, it's HA/DR. HA is a solution unto itself, and DR is a solution unto itself.
No,
In
completely
fact,
agreed.
We now have the ability to do DR with standard edition boxes without having high availability. So we'll get a little bit more into that in the design. But as we start, let's get this going. What is DR? What is disaster recovery in design to Lync 2013? What tools are we going to use? Because there are different tools and different pieces of code and commandlets and things that apply specifically to DR. What is the backup service and is it critical, and what do we need to back up and restore or import, and how have things changed in that scenario and world? And then we get into some SBA branch site resiliency things again, because that is part of the DR solution. It's not the HA solution, it's DR. When you think of an SBA, we think of WAN outage. Do we still have phone services? There's your SBA. So with that, DR in 2013. DR is new in the sense that it is the ability for a Lync server in one site, one pool, and potentially one region to fail over all services, or nearly all services, to another pool, and users retain, again, nearly all functionality.
Right.
We
had in Lync 2010, we had the idea of voice resiliency across the pool failure, to survive pool failure. But really, we've done a lot more work to provide for much more resilient services in Lync 2013 rather than just voice.
Yeah, in 2010, our only true DR Lync solution was a Metro WAN stretched pool concept, which nobody had and met the requirements of and deployed.
Very few clients.
I say nobody. Nobody's a very big word, but it was very...
And by the way, that metropolitan data center design is gone in Lync 2013.
Right. No longer an option, no longer supported, doesn't work. So going back to our DR in 2013, we're looking at the life cycle, how it works, what is HADR. Front pool pairing, again, conceptually the same process as when we were doing voice pairing back in 2010, but it does more. There's a new service that gets installed and enabled, and you've got to remember to do this after you've made the pair, install the service, or it doesn't get there. That's the Lync backup service, and we'll go over that's what it does here just shortly. And then persistent chat, again, we talked about this, and this is the third time. We'll just keep reiterating. Persistent chat isn't part of this same kind of DR solution. It's a stretched pool solution. And then finally, how do we manage what happens in the event of a disaster? What's automated, what's not automated in the process? So a front-end pool pairing, we had this concept in 2010 where we had pool A and we had pool B. In this example, it's pool 1 and pool 2. And we would go into topology and we would select that we wanted to pair it with another pool. And then there was those two boxes that came alive. How long did we wait for it to fail over voice, and how long do we wait to fail back voice? 300 and 600 seconds was the default, so 5-10 minutes. When we were looking at that, the voice pairing had to do with the idea that in 2010, while we may lose conferencing services, we may lose the ability to have presence on our buddy list and managing and doing new things, we didn't lose voice. So we've had highly available and DR voice since 2010, fully there. That's still there, and in fact, those two little boxes still show up in Topology Builder. But in addition, once we pair a pool, additional things happen in the background, and we'll see some of this magic in the demo, I hope. But the ability for your CMS to show up on two different pools, and you have a checkbox next to one, the active one. And granted, you could see that from Management Shell, or you can go into Topology Builder and see it too, which is what we'll attempt to do here. But the idea is that now your CMS lives on two pools. Your data lives on two pools, and that's all done via the replication service. The failover itself, not the voice failover, that's still that little, again, those little timer boxes. In demo, we always set it, I think, to 30 seconds each way, so that it just kind of fails and goes. But if you were to leave it at the default so that we're not flopping things back and forth overly floppage, then we are going to have the 5-10 minute marking, and that's still automatic. That's still there. There's no user intervention. Phone services still have that resiliency built into it, and that's how it's been designed since 2010. However, in the event we decide that there is a need for all services to be failed over, this outage is going to take a while to fix. Let's say there's a power issue. UPSs have now died. Backup generators didn't kick on. The main data center is going to be down for a day. We want all services back up. We can migrate all of those users to the backup pool. Keep in mind, if you are a Seattle or a North America-based pool and your backup pool's in, let's say, EU or Germany, services will be slightly deprecated. They'll be there, they'll be functional, but they're going to be slower because they're going to be pulling transatlantic. So just keep that in mind, that whoever is your backup pool, they should be fairly well connected to you when you do fail over, or your services will not have the best experience when you do fail. Okay. The backup service. So again, like we said, this is a new service, and this is a building slide, so we'll see how well this works. But the concept of the backup service, when it's installed, is that there is a pool or a standard edition server, but technically that's still a pool 1 and a pool 2. One of the boxes will be elected to be the backup service server. How's that? It's kind of like the address book service. It's running on all of the boxes, but only one's actually doing the work at any one given time. Right? The backup service is similar. One box decides he's the one, or maybe they vote, they go out to a party, whoever gets the most drunk becomes, I don't know. But one of them becomes, there's some weird logic that happens, and not weird, but different.
It's logic that we don't actually need to understand.
We don't need to understand it, and it's not disclosed, so it is.
But the good thing to recognize here is, since multiple servers can potentially host that role, it's just that one hosts it at any one time. In a failure scenario where you have a box having gone down, another server will take that role over and start doing that work for you.
That's right. Just like the address book service, just the backup service. If you grasp the address book service concept where only one's working and doing the work, if you reboot that box or he goes out of line, another server automatically spawns the service and takes over that role and function. Same concept happens here. The key is only one box is doing it in this pool scenario, and he's talking to the various machines and taking the static data. So if we look at the animation, we see data is on pool 1 and users are on pool 2 and 1. So we've got active going on both sides. And for simplicity's sake, let's say the top one is Redmond and the bottom one is LA. So geographically not that far dispersed. We have a great WAN connection between it. It's on our MPLS network. Everything's hunky-dory. So everything's happy, and data copies data between the two pools. The way that it does this is, again, with the backup service. And this is a lazy write type service in that it's doing its best effort. And at last I heard, it's a good, give it a 15-minute window is about the max you'll ever have of data that's not from one to the other.
And one of the things we do talk about in this is implementing a backup pool, a backup registrar and a backup pool with data protection between the pools will give you about a 30-minute RPO and RTO. Right.
Which, assuming that you're monitoring.
Sorry.
And know that it goes down.
Sure. Resiliency point objective and resiliency time objective.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you'll notice that data comes over from pool 1, goes over to the site of pool 2. Data from site 2 goes to site 1. Replication's in real time. It's just happening in the background. Again, it's a replication service that's managing this information. You can think of it as kind of like Windows bits, and things are just slowly just kind of filtering their way back and forth, guaranteed to get there. We know it's there. Data's there. It's just getting there. Right? So we're replicating data. Then we eventually get an actual core set. So once we enable it, it has to get the full data over. You're going to see somewhat of a spike, and then things will be fairly settled. And our user data on pool 2 and 1 are both over now on each site. So we have a duplicate of information on both sides of our world. Because the idea is, if in fact pool 1 goes down, oh no, that's a bad thing. We have the option to say, okay, users can no longer ingress into pool 1. Phone services will automatically, and registrar services will automatically fail by default to pool 2, but you'll be in that limited mode if you do nothing else. So just like 2010, if you don't do anything in the back end, if we don't try to fail over our pool, we've got the exact same user experience as Lync 2010. However, if we decide that we want to go ahead and initiate the users to be over on pool 2, and we invoke the pool failover commands, we will then go ahead and change and update the topology for all intents and purposes to reflect to the users and say, hey, I know you are technically on pool 1, but you're going to go to pool 2 to talk to them and log in and get all of your services. And all data services will come up. And again, if things are happy and willing and our demo shows such, we'll be able to display this concept where the pool has failed. User, if you look at his configuration, which we will, we'll see that he is actually registering and logging into the Rome pool, even though he's on the Redmond pool. And when that all comes up, his services are fully functional and things come over. Once we get things so that the backup is working again, we have the option to go ahead and remove the registration, as it were. It's called full pool fail back, and we kind of undo the configuration changes we did. Replication rehappens. We have what the term that we heard yesterday, the rehydration happens.
Rehydration.
We take what's changed in the database. We have a kind of a marker. So here everything's the fail point. We set a marker. We get all the new changes that have happened since we failed, and when we fail back, all of those since changes get replicated back. So we're not replicating everything back again. It's efficient and things go. We rehydrate, we reset stuff up, and voila, we're back on and registering back to pool 1. From a client experience, he will or she will be logged out, logged back in as things are happening because they've lost communication to their pool. But beyond that, everything's automated. So, okay, the persistent chat pool. We've talked again about this. The idea of a persistent chat pool that's stretched is that you have a topology of 2 locations or data centers or however you wish to say it, and there is a maximum of 8 servers with 4 active at any one time within a persistent chat pool. 4 of those servers that are inactive are receiving a SQL server on their side that it has in log shipping bringing their data over. And as stuff comes over, the log shipping, and you can think of, when I think of log shipping, I think of Exchange and DAGs. Conceptually, that's what we're doing. We're building up logs, and then we're sending them over to a server. They replay those logs. And so their database is as accurate as the amount of logs that have been shipped from server A to server B. So the SQL server is the same copy in the stretch DAG. We have 4 inactive servers that sit over in the inactive site, and then in the event of a failure, we just have to activate and change things in the topology, and we now have a server that's up and running and good to go. So that's how it's quite a bit different from how we're doing the DR in 2013. Different in that it seems to be a 1 step behind where we're at. So as we're moving through this topology and things are changing, we can only expect that next versions for persistent chat to be even more integrated and more streamlined and in the same backup scenarios as we are for a Lync server.
We had a quick question about a slide a couple ago. Is the rehydration automatic or manual? Do you have to tell it to rehydrate when you're failing
Automatic.
back?
So all of the commands, when we do the single command, which is the invoke CS pool failback, when we run this command and tell it which pool to do this to, you'll notice a bunch of commands that are happening on your behalf. So that one commandlet is a bunch of commands, and one of those is in fact the hydration. And we will see, and we'll see it in the demo again, I hope, that all the rehydration happens and it'll actually say rehydration is happening and everything comes back. So no, it's all automatic and part of our failover. We don't have to do anything other than invoke the command. The question comes up, can we automate this? In theory, sure, you could use SCOM to do watching nodes, and if you decide after 30 minutes or an hour if this has been down and nobody's interacted with it or acknowledged it, to kick off a command, sure, I guess you could.
But it's about your business processes and your external things. The Lync server team isn't going to get to a place where they're implementing an automatic failover and fail back between these, because they don't want to be in a situation where they're providing for that potential of a ping pong. So, but if your business processes dictate that you must have an automated process for failover in case of data center failure,
sure,
you can write those things and write those commands and write those commandlets, but it's not going to be implemented in the Lync product itself.
Right, it won't be an automated process in and of itself. There's an activation and manual that we have to do. It's not, but not hard, don't be afraid. It's really simple, and we'll get to it and we'll show how easy it is to implement and to then activate. So, backing up and restoring 2013. So all of you that have gone through the process of the 2010 certifications and reading what we need to back up and the process of how we back up and what we back up and what tools we use, 2013 is almost identical. There is one tool we no longer use, but beyond that, everything else is the same. So let's go through this. So PowerShell. PowerShell as a backup and restoring application is what is our it is the lifeline of what we're doing, because it allows us to go ahead and give the specifics. Now you also notice here we say approximately 730. On a previous slide yesterday it said 550. So you can guesstimate that we have somewhere between 730 and 550 commandlets. What's the real number? I don't know. I've never counted, but there are a lot of Lync server commandlets that are within here. It is a full scripting language. That's what PowerShell is. So anything you're doing to automate and to create scripts and automation and backups, PowerShell is where you're going to want to start. Even if it's remotely calling external applications, PowerShell is what can do that for you. You can be the complete scripting agent and then run under automated processes within Windows, because that's what Windows is designed to do. So
task scheduler.
The P-task old days, yes. But task scheduler. So backing up and restoring data. Again, there are explicit export commands that can be used. And if you built your own scripts to include these commandlets in it, this is where the automation comes in. So exporting the CS user data, the configuration, and the LIS configuration. Remember, the LIS used to have its own little application to export LIS stuff. Now it's just part of PowerShell.
Just a PowerShell.
All right. The CS configuration is no different than the configuration you export from Topology Builder in a slightly different format, but the one that we use when we move it over to the Edge server. That's how we get the configuration.
A zip file.
All right. So it's zip. And the user data is the user data information. So who and what and their peeps and all that goes along within them. We'll also notice that the response group export-import tool is now just export CS RGS configuration. And of course, Topology Builder can be brought up and save off the topology at any time, and that can be used as a flat file. Now, from a scripting perspective, that becomes a little bit more difficult to get the Topology Builder to launch, to export, and to come out, but it's also something that shouldn't be changing that often. And as part of your backup process, we typically state, here is the folder that has our current topology. Anytime we change it, that's where the new topology goes, and then the backup will pick up the new changed file, and it won't if anything has changed. So that can be a manual piece of the process. So critical data. What do we back up, and how do we back this stuff up? So SQL servers are important to some extent. Now we have a lot of SQL data that's moved off the back end and is moved to the front ends and is in triplicate plus in the back end. So the requirements for, it's kind of like, do we back up everything in an Active Directory box? Do we back up one AD box? Well, typically it's one Active Directory box you get, and you've got everything else because they're all duplicates of one another. It's somewhat true in the Lync world, where there's critical backups that happen on the back end SQL, and then everything that is on the front end is more stateless and kind of just abstract and happens.
So why do I have two XDSs there on my SQL server now, Brian?
Well, the XDS itself, the first one is your CMS, and that's never been changed. And from what I understand, XDS is a type of database, and really this should have been called CMS XDS, and it's just with regret that it is what it is.
That they dropped
it.
They just
didn't. So the RTC XDS is the same thing, where it's the XDS database of the RTC data. XDS is a type of database, so it's not RTC CMS, it's the RTC XDS data. So the same type of data, transmit, and it stands for something.
Extensible data store or something.
Like
yeah.
The RgsConfig and the LIS, things that while we are exporting configuration, this is the information that we can get back stayed up quickly if we have the SQL databases. On a SQL system itself, having your master model and your MSDB allows you to restore SQL. So that's kind of important. We want to have the main SQL databases that maintain the SQL database state and get those backed up. They're not specific or unique to Lync. They are specific and unique to SQL. So those are the pieces we need to do there. And then if reporting services is important, and this can become a fairly, or this is a fairly small database, so why you would not, I'm not sure. It's also not hard to rebuild, but if you want to back up your report server and your server temp databases, that's important. Again, that's information that is static, that you can just republish reports to, but you have to reconfigure it. So if you back them up, it's one less step. One thing you'll notice that's not on here and isn't listed is stuff like your archives and your QoE data, your CDR data. That's up to you. Some companies, it's critical, and if it's part of archive, happens to be part of your compliance, that's probably going to need to be backed up.
You may want to back it up and replicate it over to the other side.
It would be unfortunate to lose if you had tons of data and trending and things of that nature, so you may want to back up that information, but it's not a requirement to get SQL back up and to get Lync back up, so that's why they're not listed here. But again, that's at your own discretion. Again, some companies just do all databases on the SQL server because they have the storage space and time. If that's what is easiest for you, great. This is just pointing out what you have to have in order to get things back, or we'll lose data. The RgsConfig. So when we think of response groups and we think of we've created them, there's a lot of information that we want to be able to get back when we have created these formulations. And so we have these different response groups we've created. So there's a good 30, 40, 50 of them within the system. While we may have the contact objects that have been created within Lync, if we don't bring back the response group data, none of that workflow comes back with it. So nothing works. So we have the ability to do an export of the RGS configuration, and we have the option to kind of import it back in. And the commands are easily and logically export CS RGS configuration and import CS RGS configuration. Again, all natively part of the tools rather than being third-party need add-ons nowadays. Callpark. Callpark as a service is part of Lync. That's good and going. But if you have specific music files that you've imported in, custom help prompts, things of that nature, those things you're going to want to get from the file store. Now, you could back up the entire file store. That's an option.
But at the very least, you need to back those things up and be prepared to reinsert them
That's
on your new response groups when they're back.
You're going to have to take those exact WAV files and put them back where they need to go and create your application IDs to be able to tie them to them to bring them back in. There's a lot of data that is in the file store that you may not desire to back up, and especially if you're a heavy conferencing shop and you have hundreds, if not thousands, of conferencing going on with a lot of PowerPoint shares. There'll be a lot of data you're backing up a lot of the time. And is it necessary? I don't know. Again, that's your business process. If you lose that data, do you mind? It's static data that should be able to be re-uploaded. Your call. But
if you've got a lot of long-running conferences where people have pre-uploaded their content into these conferences for recurring meetings or recurring trainings, you may want to be prepared for that. There was a question about, and I just want to make sure this, we should confirm that response groups don't automatically fail over as part of a pool failover, and they must be re-imported on the other side and re-brought live.
That's right. There's a couple of things that don't come over with the pool failover. Response groups is one of those. So RGS, CPS, CAC and things of those natures aren't going to work.
And Callpark, think about this. Why would Callpark fail over? If you need Callpark services in the other site anyway, it has a different orbit range and a different Callpark range. So when I fail over to that other server and come live, and I place a call on Park, it just goes into that new set of Callpark ranges.
Just saying it doesn't come over, that's all.
I completely agree it doesn't come over, but when you stop and think about it conceptually, Callpark is one of those where it exists as a unique configuration on the other side.
Right, pull per pull. And it's, and from a response group, we've had people that have created response groups and that are quote unquote dead, that are on the other side, that live there, and then we're simply changing out when there's a failure, they exist, they just don't have the phone number that we want associated to them, so we change the phone numbers and put them in the new ones, we're good to go. Keep in mind, the phone number has to get there. So just because you have a phone number, if the telco is not routing that number...
SIP trunking providers, your telco, your ITSP...
Somebody's got to have to do something, right? Either automated by your SIP provider, that's a telco or an ITSP, or you're going to have to call up your carrier and say, hey, this is my new ingress point, and do these BRIs instead of these PRIs, and that's where they go.
Yep. We did have a quick question about, does CAC fail over? When you think about it, CAC is a deployment, exists in the deployment. It is not unique to a site or unique to a pool. When a user fails over to another site, they'll start potentially using the CAC rules that apply to that site's data, but the CAC information, in fact, exists just as a part of the organization. It doesn't matter whether it's in one pool or another pool.
Okay. LIS is another one that doesn't fail over correctly. That has to do with LIS and the phone numbers and the ports automatically, I guess is the point. It doesn't fail over. Not that it couldn't be configured to have backup routes and things couldn't go here, but as by default, that's another one that's listed as a non-failure. But otherwise, everything comes on over. Okay, off to critical data. Critical data to export and import. And this is where some of our stuff has changed. So again, we get back to export your CS configuration. Great to have. It allows that if the CMS were corrupt, were missing, were died, in theory, we could just do an import CS config and bring it right back in. Yeah, very simple to do, and using the deployment wizard like we do for an Edge server, or using the management shell and just running the command, we can bring that stuff back into the local database, let alone anywhere else. And that's the old command import CS configuration file name dash local database store, I think it is, and in it comes. So that's how we could rehydrate, and that's if we're not getting replication and we're not getting our automated file transfer isn't working. One way to kind of stopgap band-aid that for the moment is to export and go to every box and import it locally, the current configuration, into each box. Is that automated, and is that a great way to get things going? No, but at least everything is the correct configuration at that point in time. Then you need to figure out why you're not replicating. So the LIS configuration, exporting the LIS config and then the file name and the backup name. Again, very similar to our CS configuration. Just we're using a different command. And then the importing is the exact opposite. The location information server data is important to bring in and out because there's a lot of stuff you'll be setting up in your wire map, and to lose that would be very unfortunate. Very unfortunate. Because typically in large environments, the wire map is massive for LIS. And here's where we get our big change. So you may recall that in previous versions for a very long time, we've had this tool called DB Import Export. Database Import Export, or DBIMP-EXP. This allowed us to export data out of the user's information. This would include their buddy lists, their way they've grouped things, if they've been flagged for D&D, things of those nature. And if we were going to tear down the pool and reinstall a pool, in theory you could export that with this tool, reprovision the users, and then bring all of their buddies right back into the list. And today, that tool has been deprovisioned or decommissioned or de-emphasized, not longer working. And instead, we have an actual command that's built in directly to the management shell, which is export CS user data and import CS user data. Now, we can use the DB import data from a 2010 export and then modify and bring in and kind of do our things for the DB import using it on the 2013 side. Doesn't work so well going the other way, but we can get data from 2010 in a migration scenario or a DR scenario or a disaster, everything's blown up scenario. If we have that data, we can
import it
in
in
2013.
Yep.
And that's supported. We commonly, right or wrong, will modify this data. So when we're doing mass changes, such as, we just changed everyone's SIP URI namespace, and so everybody's buddy's wrong. And so we can export everybody in the enterprise and find and replace and then bring it back in. People, they don't like that.
Sailing on the seas of unsupportability.
Yes, that's right. You're doing stuff and you're modifying the data that's not supported. So all I'll say is you can still kind of do that here. It's XML, but it's still not supported. So FYI.
If you get into a situation where that's your only recourse, and you import that, and then something doesn't quite work right, and you call PSS.
You never admit it.
No, and that comes up, they're going to have some questions for you.
Sure. Okay.
We had a quick question about can you recover conference directories that you haven't backed up? So no, if you haven't backed the conference directories up, there will be new conference directories on the other pool, but that user, if you haven't backed it up, that user's going to have to reschedule all their conferences.
Yeah, and I guess it really depends on your organization to a very large extent of how important that is. If you don't have a lot of reoccurring meetings, the impact may not be that big a deal. If you have an organization that lives in conferencing, both voice, data, whatever, and have scheduled a lot of meetings, and you lose their data, their conferencing directory, they're going to be fairly upset. When they go to join and everything they click on says, can't find that conference. That's bad. So that's what the conference directories are maintaining. So you want to make sure you are backing up your servers in order to maintain that data. Okay, branch resiliency. Branch resiliency is not changed at all from 2010 to 2013. The SBA and SBS story is identical. Nothing has changed in this whatsoever. However, you do need to know it, and we're going to assume you know it, but still go through it anyway, because that's what we do. So, the site resiliency options. What can we do from a site resiliency to give a remote site from where the main pool is an option to have resiliency should the WAN go down? So, the SBA has been long touted as a great solution, and it is, don't get me wrong, for voice resiliency. but that's all you've got. Registration and voice resiliency for local mediation.
Right.
One-to-one,
You
single
still
calls.
don't have presence.
That's right. There's still not presence. You still don't have any response
Conferencing.
groups, auto attendance. There's all kinds of stuff you're going to learn. Any multi-party, anything, gone.
Yeah.
Because there's no MCUs that exist on this SBA. It is the mediation service and the registration service. That's it. Okay. But a great voice resiliency solution to make sure you still have inbound calls happening and outbound calls happening. For some of these locations, it may be important to be able to get a forwarding direct number in so that anything inbound to your main number that used to hit a response group, perhaps it goes directly to one number, and that's in the event of an outage, and you have a operator that's answering the call. So you're intervening, but you're not losing calls. There's ways to get these calls into existing Lync phones. Again, that's the SBA story, and it's been that way since our 2010 world. SIP trunking can be used in addition to the SBA, because in a SIP trunk, we have the ability for the provider to flip things around automatically for us. As things come in to the SPC from the provider, go through to our mediation server, we have a solution. In theory, the supported side of this is really only capable if it's a VPN tunnel that exists. And I'm not sure why the requirement of a VPN tunnel between you and your provider is ever stated there.
It was a...
Yeah. So,
won't go there.
that being said, there's a lot of SIP providers that can do redundant trunks. You can build it with redundant trunks. You can set it up so that if your mediation server pool goes down from, or all trunks go down to, let's say, an LA SIP trunk provider, they may also have a hosted solution in Chicago, and you will automatically fail over on their side via Chicago for your DoD ingress, and you'll fail out to their Chicago because that's what's up, or to their Fort Wayne, or to their whatever.
New York, whatever it is.
Right. So that's up to your provider and you, and building your routing appropriately to support this HA solution. Media bypass. That can be used so that in the event that the WAN link goes down and our main outbound happens to be going via the WAN link, well now, because we can't reach that user because it's a link call, we can actually use a PSTN call to go out, back around, and kind of do this big loop.
Yeah.
Is it the most cost effective? Maybe not. Are calls more important than cost? If so, then who cares?
And this may be something you can actually configure this effectively on a per user basis through voice policies. You can set some users in your organization to be able to do PSTN bypass, and other users not be able to do PSTN bypass.
Right. So it's really who's important that their calls always go out or in, and how things work. And from a communications perspective, again, it's building what's the business requirements and processes, and if they're not important, that those calls go down. It's not that important that things get out, well then we're not going to have to worry about it. But really, that we don't really talk in here about things. But what about having a highly available WAN solution? If this site is that important and there's that critical of communications here, why did we not have two different providers on two different WAN links, whether one's dark or not, ready to go? Or an appliance in the middle that's load balancing the communications between these two providers and doing IP address translations in and out, all kinds of stuff that's possible. There's other things outside of Lync to make your environment and your network highly available to avoid a lot of these costly issues. And then finally we have CAC, Edge, and Reroute. And that's an interesting idea of having a location that has an Edge server, because they have a direct network connection to the internet, that if in fact we can't make a call to a user internally because the WAN's down, but we do have internet and they're different circuits, then let's go out the edge and in the other edge to get right back around and make the call edge to edge. That's a supported workaround as well. So that's your PSTN rerouting, going in through the edge servers, blocked by CAC if there's too many calls, or from an outage perspective, and out the PSTN reroute. So, yes. And again, those are resiliency options, especially and it's all voice related. These are voice ways to keep things up from a site. And
we actually had a question about that from a voice perspective.
Awesome.
So, in the M2N, in the multi-to-many voice gateway relationship, how does the gateway know if one mediation server is down, it should attach to the next one?
Oh, okay.
It's
So
really
part of
about the gateway supporting that.
The
though.
gateways and the new logic within the 2013 mediation. And they're doing self-help kind of pings, which we're doing SIP options all the time anyway. Yep. We know if things are up, and based off if it's a 400 or 500 response, determines if we give up on the thing and say it's dead, it's done, it's given us a 500, it can't get there. Or is it a 400 operationally not ready,
denied, of some sort,
some user type error that we decide it's not really down, it's that the call is not allowed to go out that particular route.
Yeah.
So we have a monitoring process that's happening all the time with anything that's connected, and you can see it in your logs. If you shut down a trunk, you'll be seeing stuff saying, we can't get to this, we can't get to this.
Yep.
And once it marks it down, it's down until there's a reason for it to think it's back up.
Yep, but if you've got gateways that are connected to multiple mediation servers, they need to have the logic to be able to try multiple paths for an inbound call.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that logic isn't going to work. It does depend on your gateway to also support that same M-to-N relationship we've got on the Lync side.
Right. And if you look at the OIP, the supported media gateways that exist there, that's why you're supported, because you support the features of Lync. And all the big guys, that's what they do. It's not that hard to configure. You do have to configure it correctly to set up pool groups, and very much like we're doing on the Lync side, where we're doing a pool of users, we're going to have a pool of mediation servers, and then we have a priority list and things go that way. So anyway, that is supported as long as everybody supports everything all the way around. Okay. Centralized PSTN versus distributed. A lot of this has to do with what should I do, and pros and cons of each one. There's definitely money and advantages to doing a centralized PSTN, simply because you have fewer moving parts, fewer hardware resources, probably fewer contracts that are in place from a vendor's perspective. Resiliency becomes easier because your fewer central sites to deal with means that you can allow for easier site resiliency of PSTN. Right? We know where things are coming in, we know where things are going out. The logic paths are very simple to figure out. So from maintaining, from a overall utilization and a logic flow, it's very simplified and easy to maintain. Yeah. There also is the concept of, if we want to do least cost routing in a centralized model, there is no such thing as a least cost routing. Right? Everything's going out one point, so part of the reason why routing becomes so simplistic. You have a call, it goes here. You have a call that's bound for anything, it's going here. Everything's just going out one point or egress point. So that's centralized PSTN and in one point. So it becomes very simplified. The downside is that means you don't have as much flexibility from a least cost routing perspective or from a resiliency perspective. So if you look at the advantages of distributed, you get great flexibility. All kinds of options become available of, I'm making this call to Kuala Lumpur. I have a local mediation gateway in Kuala Lumpur. Let's just have it go out the Kuala Lumpur PSTN route over the WAN to get there, and then we have a local toll call. That may, depending on the pricing and the telephone and everything else, it may make sense. I don't know. It can also be at backup routes. It can be other options.
That's the other thing is, when we're talking about media bypass and WAN, they're kind of mutually exclusive relationships here, right?
Right.
You can only do media bypass with local resources. So when you're talking about media bypass saving WAN bandwidth resources, it's because you're actually converting that call to a PSTN call. It's exiting via a local gateway and then transiting the PSTN to get ingress on the other side and not use the WAN.
So I will say most of the times we see a centralized PSTN access model with additional small sites with a distributed. So it is becoming, from what I've seen, is becoming, and maybe you've seen different, less and less important to have localized least cost routing egress, especially when we are moving more and more to internet SIP trunks where it's a single cost. It doesn't matter where the call is going. So we're just complicating things if we want them to go out one versus the other. Instead, we may have 3 data centers and we'll use all 3 data centers as backups to one another. So if we can't get out the Chicago data center, even though that's where the user's homed, well, try the New York route, try the LA route. It's all the same cost. We don't care.
Yeah, if you've got a well-deployed SIP trunk solution and you've got the WAN bandwidth to handle the calls between sites such that a user can exit their call wherever, then you're going to end up letting people break out locally wherever they break out. Break out in that mode.
Right. Yep. Funny, because speaking of the distributed concepts, this was huge least cost routing back in the early 90s, not so much for telephone, but for faxing. Remember when we used to have faxes? You'd have fax endpoints and pops all over the world if you were a distributed international company, so that when you faxed, you could fax to a local location via their fax. And multiple vendors did it. There was a big one out of Tucson, Arizona, that we used to use all the time. And yeah, so that was my introduction to least cost routing, was back in '94. Anyway, so moving along. Planning for rerouting and incoming and outgoing calls. Some of this has to do with what can you do and what do you want to do. And if you want to do it and you can't do it, you need to look at alternative solutions so that you can do it, right? So what are your capabilities? What's the problem that you'll be implementing or trying to overcome? And then what kind of connectivity options do you have? So rerouting incoming and outgoing calls, again, if you're working with an internet SIP trunk provider, can be fairly simplistic and the logic's on their side.
If you're working with POTS lines or T1s in a region, you may not have much option for reroute in case of server failure, because it may be a case where they say it's inside your DMARC, fix it yourself.
Right, and there may be other carriers that we've worked with, at least in the United States, that have these little web portals that in the event of an outage, I can say, or maintenance, I can say all incoming numbers to my DIDs forward to this number. And then there you go. It's going to somebody's cell phone, and they keep going off the crazy. But there's options. So this is, again, when we're planning for incoming and outgoing calls, we need to figure out what are our capabilities, what are our current providers going to offer us, what are our hardware solutions. If we only have one point for in and out, it really doesn't matter that our solution provider, whoever they happen to be, support or don't support this a alternate solution, because there's nowhere else for us to go. But if we're trying to build in a solution, keep in mind that you may be looking at new voice providers if this is what is important to you, and that's keeping voice up all the time with seamless in and outbound routing. And I will also say, in general, internet SIP trunk providers are the way that we get around the smoothest failure without knowledge of failure in and outbound, because we don't care where you egress from, and ingress will happen logically, similar to how Lync's saying, I can't get to this mediation server, now we're going to try this mediation server, because they're SBCs that they're sending you their calls from. So SBC to SBC, they have their logic just as you do. So the guidelines for creating, well, again, redundant WAN links. It can't be said enough that you can set up all kinds of alternate solutions. In the end, it may be that the solution just needs to be you need to add another WAN link to the site. A lot of this comes back to the business requirements of how important is it to keep things up. The advantage of a redundant WAN link is all services are now available when one WAN link goes down. We're not just trying to say, okay, PSTN reroute can get us some voice calls in, and the SBA can do a little of this and a little of that. Well, if you have a redundant WAN link and then one goes down, that's nice, assuming you've sized them appropriately, that you have the WAN links to supply the functionality. When a call is rejected, what do we want to do? There's a lot of different things. Like I said, there are some carriers who will auto-call rejection, forward a call to a particular number. So if you're down, you don't lose calls, they just go somewhere else.
Maybe a voicemail box, maybe something else.
And a voicemail is an awesome solution. In fact, part of our call admission control reroute options of, I can't reach you, but I can get to your voicemail, it dumps you right into voicemail for that very reason. We don't want a fast busy, or we don't want a call that doesn't go through. Just
let you leave a message. Since you were trying to do that, yeah.
And then a distributed network. You're putting this voice system on a data network that could and should be more resilient than your PSTN copper network ever was. There's no point in not making it as resilient as it could be if that is what is important to you. So again, business requirements, making sure you match business requirements. The product can, for the most parts, do what you need to do if you're willing to invest in the infrastructure to allow it to do so. Okay? For creating a resilient voice design, that's a little bit different, because the voice design is much simpler to achieve. And we say simpler, I mean, simpler.
Voice is rarely simple.
Right, simpler than a data resiliency, because data, we need everything up, and we need WAN, we need stuff there. But we can do edge servers, we can do redirects of some communication with media bypass and overrides and all kinds of
PSTN
different
reroutes.
and
There
you
are
know,
options.
If we don't have networks, so do we have a bank of 24 PUTS lines just ready and lit up, ready to just let our calls go out, but outbound? That doesn't help for inbound.
Right, but that
gets our calls out.
And then you're putting yourself in a situation where you may have some functionality relying on old gateways, right? So you transit normally, everything goes Lync out PSTN reroute or out through your mediation servers talking to your SIP trunks. But if that SIP trunk goes down, the mediation server goes down, it's entirely possible that you'll have this very high cost backup route that your top senior execs can use, and that exits via this old bank of 24 POTS lines connected off and hanging off that gateway somewhere.
Right. But they don't know the system's down. Everybody's happy because the COOs are all happy, and the CEOs, and the C class, and the B class, and the D class, and moving along. So, best practices when we're looking at what to do. Business process should be at the top of this, is making sure that business is dictating what is resilient, what is required for DR, from a voice and from a data perspective. Keep in mind that typically speaking, voice will be more important, making sure we get and do not lose calls, so inbound calls and the ability to place outbound calls, or at least outbound for some individuals within the organization, is more important than the data. If, though, you are a call center and you need to have calls come in regardless, all the time, anytime, and nothing's going out, well, then your focus will be on how do we make sure we have resiliency for our phones to come in. If you're a conferencing center and all you do is 3, 4, 5-way calls, you know what? It's going to be more important that you have an SE or probably an EE pool on site and for your premise so that you have conferencing availability in addition to your phone resiliency. Again, this all comes from your design sessions and figuring out what matters to the organization. So if some workloads are more relevant than others, this is where we've had sites of 50 that are all senior or C-class level executives. Well, if that's the case, we may very well have a small enterprise pool dedicated to those users so that at all times that tiny little location is up, way oversized for needs, but it's not about the capabilities and size, and at some points not even about the money. It's about systems up all the time and available to these particular users. If we have smaller remote offices or sales offices, not that they're less important, don't get me wrong, but if we have these smaller offices and they have 4, 5, 6 people there, and they have some sort of internet connection, whether it be a DSL line out or a cable modem line out, or they're all working off their LTE cards, perhaps they don't get anything. Maybe they're just coming in and ingressing through your edge server, and that's appropriate, and that works, and that meets your business model and requirements. This is very much so a personal experience, and it's going to be designed differently in every single organization. No matter what, it's going to be different because everybody has different needs. There isn't a cookie-cutter design for Lync, unfortunately, or not. I mean, great for me, it means I'm always involved in design sessions. Not so great for those that just want to have a cookie-cutter solution, here we go, Lync in a box. It really is hard to find that super secret sauce that matches exactly what fits everybody's needs. It just doesn't exist. And don't forget the network. You're relying on it even internally. That's the LAN. That's what you're plugging your network into. One, if the network's bad, and you have... We had a client that was complaining about voice call quality, and we ended up tracing back his communications. So it was an internet SIP trunk provider. The call came in to their data center. It then went off to the remote location, and then we found that the user was 4 hubs, not switches, hubs down the path before we finally hit him. And we were wondering why we were having issues with communications. If the network's poor, it doesn't gonna really matter how good the infrastructure is on the Lync server side if we can't make the communication call. It's also not gonna matter if we're overrunning because we're an old 100 megabit backbone network, or if we're a 10 megabit backbone network. Things aren't going to work the way you expect them to work. So don't forget the physical local LAN network, as well as the wide area network, and the MPLS network, as well as the internet network. All part of our design process that we need to go through. So with that, do we have any questions or anything that's within the queue that we need to address?
We're actually handling most of them. our really helpful MVPs are taking most of them. We've got a couple of people who are sort of peppering us with a couple of questions, but we're getting them taken care of. So
Okay.
I
So
think
then with that, we're going to take our normal 10-minute break at the
when we come
resume,
back, yep.
There we go. Blah, blah, blah. When we come back, we are going to have a fun-filled demo. You will not want to miss this. This is going to be high availability. This will be disaster recovery. You're going to see things fail, see things come back, users stay up, users going not down. It's going to be
Let's
awesome.
hope.
Yeah, assuming our labs work. But assuming everything goes well, it's going to be a great fun time. So we'll see everybody back in 10.